Hi, everybody. This is Mike Barcik and my comrade. Tell us your name.
My name is Ali.
And we're going to do a webinar today on UA trade-off tools. And we're going to talk a little bit about why you might need this tool and what you need to go through to make it work. That was me trying to be really clever and type in the title right there where it's being highlighted. I assume you can see that. Is that right, Ollie?
Yep.
Okay, so now that we've mastered that very high-tech opening graphic, we're going to kind of set this up. But I also always want to make this plug for southface.org. You go to education, our courses, energy code, and then under Georgia Energy Code, there's a bunch of resources. And chances are that might be where you're finding this webinar, but there's a lot of good resources, field guides and copies of all the slides of the presentations and so on. So at this point, I'm going to jump and kind of get into the ways that you can show compliance with the energy code. And of course, there's always the prescriptive path, and the prescriptive path is based on the 2015 IECC, but it's amended to the Georgia amendments, and I'll show you the actual values. And then if you don't want to meet prescriptive chart, you can meet the UA trade-off, or you can do ResCheck. ResCheck basically is a UA trade-off. It's a very nice tool. People love it, except next year we'll see why it's going to be a little tricky to use. There's always an option of an annual simulation, and then in the newest code, there's also this option of achieving a low enough HERS index, 57, 57, or 62 for climate zone 4. So if you can get a low HERS index, you can comply. But we're mainly going to talk about how to do a hand version of a UA trade-off today. That's kind of our big thing. So to start, let's review what is the, actually I'm just going to cut to the chase and say, if Georgia had adopted this code, the IECC as written, we would have R20 walls. And that's a big change that we did not go to. And what we ended up changing was down here in red, and this is sort of my version of it, but that's a big difference there. So you could arguably say we weaken the prescriptive code by not requiring R20 walls for climate zones 3 and 4. If you're in climate zone 2, you can use ResCheck all the way. That's a great answer, and you don't have to, you're fine because your walls will still be R13. We'll talk more about that. Basically, this is our code. This comes out of the Georgia supplements and amendments, and it's based on the table that's in the code. The one that people are more commonly familiar with is the R value table, which is 402.1.2. And for example, in climate zone 3, the windows in all climate zones are the same, 0.35 U factor and 0.27 solar heat gain. All ceilings everywhere in the state are R38. All walls are R13. All attic knee walls, if such a thing exists, is R18. And a mass wall is either R8 if it's on the outside, R13 if it's on the inside, and any floors are R19, unless they're cantilever floor, then they're R30. And then for basement walls and crawl space walls, it's either R5 continuous or it's R13 if you have a cavity, and no insulation required for slabs. So everything I just went across for climate zone 3, there might be a slight difference for other climate zones, but that's the prescriptive code. And if you build exactly to this recipe or better, you don't have to do a trade-off. But if you want to do a trade-off, that's where something you want to do less than this, then that's fine. There are limits on how much you can trade. For example, ceilings you can trade as low as R20 if it's spray foam, but that's it. And there's some kind of backstop values. We'll take a look at that at the end. But at the end of the day, this is the prescriptive chart. If you can meet all of those requirements, you're done. If you need to do a trade-off, you're probably going to kind of be using this table below it, which is kind of the lesser known sister of the above table. It's the same more or less information, though. Instead of R values, it gives you U factors. So no change on window U factors. Ceilings, basically 1 over R38 is going to be a 0.030 U factor. And likewise, 1 over R13 is going to be a 0.084 U factor. And then mass walls, instead of that, you get a 0.098. And R19 floor insulation would be a 0.047. That's about 1 over 19 is pretty close to that number. And then basement walls, again, the equivalent basement wall on a U factor is 0.091. Same for crawl space walls over here. So in essence, when you do a UA trade-off, the house you're proposing to build is compared against a house that's built exactly to the line, to this line across here. Does that make sense, Ali? Okay, I appreciate you saying that. No, you're the only person probably listening that made sense to. But we're going to come back to this table, this 402.14 table, and that's kind of what I want to reference it. So let me just jump and look at ResCheck. So this is a great tool. The only challenge is there's not going to be a Georgia-specific version of it. You can use ResCheck, and you should, particularly if you're in Climate Zone 2. But for those of us in Climate Zone 3 and 4, if you select the 2015 IECC, which you must do as your reference code, it's going to essentially assume the walls are R20. So if you can make it pass using ResCheck, great, that's terrific, but you just have to appreciate that you're being held against a standard that is in essence harder than the Georgia code. So you can get ResCheck, and you're going to need ResCheck if you do this hand trade-off. And we're going to use ResCheck's sort of built-in library of U factors for different assemblies. So you're going to need to get that. And you get it from this website, energycodes.gov. And again, there's not a Georgia-specific version of it next year or in the 2020 and on version. So you'll have to choose the IECC 15. So I'm just going to quickly go. I have it. You can download it or you can do a web-based version. I'm just going to quickly show it and see if it works here, where you get to this on the internet. So I'm going to click on that, and it's popping up with energycodes.gov. And there's a similar tool called ComCheck, and there's also one called ResCheck. So probably the easiest thing is just download it for Windows, but you can also use a web-based version. I'm not sure this is going to work, but we'll see what happens. The one good thing is you can probably see the screen a little better. Yeah. Right now it's kind of a boring white screen. Is that what you're seeing? Okay, there we go. So apparently I have a couple example projects open. Or maybe those came with it, but this is more or less what it looks like. It definitely has a different look than the downloadable version, but it's doing the same kind of math, if you will. So I'm going to not use that one anymore and go back to the version that I have downloaded, which I can't really zoom. Can you zoom in on that, Ali?
Yeah, we can zoom in through the, there's a bar that says zoom at the top of your shared screen window.
Okay. So if you can just show people what that looks like. So when you download ResCheck, this is what it looks like. And the main things that we want to get out of it is this column right here of U factors. We're going to let ResCheck sort of do all the lookups, and then we're going to make a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and we're going to use these as our assembly U factors. So I might just start from scratch on this and blank it out here, and I'm gonna wing it here and go, not even save this and just start from scratch, living on the edge. So when you kind of start and you pick Georgia, Atlanta, you can go up under code, and there's the old or the Georgia 2011 code, but there isn't a Georgia 2020. So you'll have to pick 2015. And then you go into this tab for envelope, and this is where we're gonna build it out. Okay, the part that I'm gonna share with everybody, if you want it, and is a spreadsheet tool that you can use. And at the moment, the instructions are not really up to speed, but it basically looks like this. So you can enter as many as 4 different above grade wall assemblies. You can enter as many as 3 different types of foundations. You can enter 3 different kinds of ceilings. You can enter, I don't know, like 20 different kinds of windows. So I've already entered the information for this house's windows, but this is just an example of a calculation. Actually, I'm going to change the title of that. Instead of saying example, I'm going to say Georgia UA Climate Zone 3 trade-off, because that's what it is. All right. There's also a tab right here that says, I'll hit save on that. It says prescriptive code table, and that should look familiar to you. That's what we were just looking at, and particularly the U factor down here, not so much the R values. I put it in there just so people could see it, but this is the one that we really want to focus on, is these values. And there, just by the way, slabs are also right here. And I also want to say Georgia has this backstop table, which when you read between the lines, it says you can do a trade-off, but for example, you can only trade floors down from 19 to 13. You can't trade them to 0. You can trade an attic from 38 to 30, but you can't trade it to 10. And you know, vaulted ceiling, if it's spray foam, you can do R20. Anyway, there's more information here, and we'll talk about that. Your windows can be as bad as 0.5, basically today's window in 2019. Or the solar heat gain can drift as high as 3.0 instead of 2.7, but it can't drift higher than that. And that's a weighted average. And there's also a calculator tool for that over here. We'll talk about that.
So it pretty much gives you
your
wiggle room.
Yeah, that's how much you can wiggle. And this is the lowest you can go. And basically, if you go to R20 in the roof, you're going to have to do a trade-off somewhere else. So you're only able to trade essentially envelope for envelope. You can't get credit using this compliance option for things like you know, more efficient air conditioner or a tighter house. And for those, you're going to have to go to the simulation options. Okay, so Ali, here's what I've done. I don't even have a set of plans. I'm just pretending that I have a set of plans. And I have an example house trade-off, and I really should say trade-off, example house trade-off data, or takeoffs, really is what it is. So in this fictitious house, we're going to say that we have some wood frame walls that are 16-inch on center, and those walls have R13 in the cavity, and there's 1,000 square feet. And I'm going to delete these because normally you wouldn't have that information going into it. And then also we've got 500 square feet of wall that has 13 in the cavity plus an R3, just to kind of shake things up, just make it a little different. And then we're going to have some block wall with R8 insulation, and it's 500 square feet. I just made these up. The key here is that very different from ResCheck. ResCheck, you just get the gross area. Here on this hand version, you basically have to give it the net area. So that would be the wall area left over after you've subtracted out the windows and doors. So I don't know how many total windows and doors I have. I've listed them down below here, but let's just try this. Equals the sum of those columns. So you kind of have to know a little bit about spreadsheets. So I have 260 square feet of windows and doors, and so that would mean my frame walls would be 1,500, those two added together, plus the 260. So you're basically looking at, you know, 1,760 gross wall area, and then subtract out the windows and doors. And you don't have to do this in ResCheck. ResCheck, you know, handles all this for you. This is the fun of the hard version here, but you can do it anyway. So you end up with a net area. And then in terms of foundations, I decided to make multiple foundations. I put a slab, it's R0. I put a 4-foot block crawl space wall. I'm going to reduce that actually down from R7 to R5. So I'm going to call that R5. And it says it's 1 foot below grade. You're going to need to answer some questions about where the insulation is and so on. And then I've also got a 9-foot basement wall that's R5. Continuous. And here's the different areas. One thing to note is anytime you talk about a slab, it's all heat loss off the edge. So it's not an area for slabs, it's a perimeter. And you have to make sure you multiply the perimeter times its, I'm going to hand wave and call it U factor. It's actually a different term, but we're going to call it a U factor. 180 times. So it's 180 feet around the perimeter of the exposed slab, or of the slab edge, basically. And then for ceilings, we're going to say, oh, we've got 1,000 square feet of R38. We've got 500 square feet of looks like spray polyurethane foam, R20. And then we've got some that's a combination of fiberglass and I call it a condensation break, and that is 600 square feet. So those different assemblies are talked about in the main training of the energy code. I want to see if I can show you really quickly what I was talking about when I talk about the different seal. So I have to scroll a little, oops, there we go. I saw it. So basically, the ceilings are all R38 prescriptively, but you can do spray foam under the roof deck as long as it's at least R20, and of course this would be where you're doing a trade-off. And then you can also do another type of unvented assembly, which is an R20, and in climate zone 3 an R5 foam board. So let's pretend we're doing that, or we could do this version of it where the foam board is more continuous. I'll do this version right here, option 2. And then also, for what it's worth, you can also do a vent baffle that is essentially all the way up, and you have to put a dam at the end so that the soffit vent only vents the air up above it. But that would allow you to do an R20 fiberglass. So I'm going to do this this vaulted assembly right here, and I'm going to do this vaulted assembly right here. So I just thought I'd point those out. And going back now to the code, you can see that I got 500 square feet of spray foam, and I've got 600 square feet of fiberglass foam board combination. And then for my windows, I'm just going to say I have A windows, and there's 100 square feet, and those more or less just meet the 0.35 U factor. I have some B windows that are better. There's 50 square feet of those. I have some C windows that are 20 square feet. They're worse. Same for D, they're worse. And also have E windows, a glass door, which is slightly worse on U factor. It's 20 square feet. And I have some solid doors that are pretty much dead on, 0.35. So when I made this as my sort of starting point right here, because when I go to ResCheck, I'm going to try to fill in these U factors right here with what those assemblies are. So we're going to use sort of the power of ResCheck, even though ResCheck can't sort of finish the job. So let me go to ResCheck. And again, Ollie, if you feel like we can't see it, let me know. But I think what I'm going to do, try a combination here. I'm going to try to do a little thing where I split my screen. Hopefully we can kind of see everything. So the first thing we're doing is a wall. So I'm going to click on this tab under envelope for wall, and it says, okay, what kind of wall? So these are all my choices. I can build any of these what I'm using ResCheck for is to get what is the U factor for that assembly. So I'm going to go wood frame 16-inch on center, and I don't even have to put an area in here because I'm not going to use it. We could if we wanted, but it would be the gross area, so that would not really be correct. What I want is, and it says make sure you give me a number, blah blah blah. So what I want is the cavity is R13, and you'll notice there's no continuous insulation, and this is the key number I want, the 0.082. That's what that assembly is. So I'll come over here, 0.082. And now I got to do the same for the 24-inch. Now I can just edit this, or just for clarity, I'm going to make a second wall just so you can see it. This one's 24-inch on center. It's R13 in the cavity, and it is a R3 continuous. I heard a message there. Did you hear that?
Oh no, volume down.
That's okay. That just meant wake up everybody if you're going to sleep here. So now we've got a 0.063 on that U factor. So I'll come over here and say, okay, that's a 0.063. And now let's say I want one more wall. This one is going to be a masonry block with empty cells. I'm going to say there's exterior insulation, and I might have to tell it. I don't remember if I have to tell it or not, but I'm going to put in the cavity. There isn't any, but there is an R8, and that's continuous. And so that ends up with a 0.089 U factor. So I'll put that in here. Okay, and now let's jump down and do foundation type. So let's put in, I probably should just for kicks, I'll put 1 square foot for each one of these, just so you can see the math. and it'll multiply 1 times 0.082, and it's rounding it to 0 over here. So maybe that's not a very good answer. Maybe I should show 10 or something. And anyway, doesn't mean anything. All I need out of here is these U factors. So now that I've done that, I'm going to do the foundation type. I'm going to do a slab on grade. So when you hit floor, it gives you sort of an insulated floor over a cantilever or over a crawl space or a garage, but we're also a slab on grade. And then it says, tell me about, is it heated or unheated? Everybody in Georgia is almost certainly going to be unheated. It means you have radiant tubing inside the slab. So say heated. We're not going to put any insulation, so I can just sit okay on that. I'll give it 1 foot. And it's going to remind me, make sure that you meant to say, feet, not area. There is no continuous insulation. Where 1.042 is our U factor. So I'm going to put 1.042. All right, let's do a crawl space wall. So you come over here, crawl space wall. This is a block with empty cells, is what I think I decided. And the wall height is 4 feet. Can you see this diagram, Ali? The depth below grade, in my example, we're going to say it's 1 foot below grade. And the insulation, we're going to pretty much just say it runs down 4 feet. So I'll say okay. And I can, again, that's unnecessary. There is no cavity insulation, but there is an R5 continuous insulation. And so the depth of the insulation is 4 feet, blue, 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 all this information. But ultimately, this is the term I want, the 0.157. So you describe your crawl space and let ResCheck tell you what is the actual U factor. So I got that in there, and now I got one more. I got a basement wall. Basement wall. This is a solid concrete wall, and we're going to say it is 9 feet. Excuse me. It is 8 feet below grade, and the insulation is also 9 feet. Okay, and so that basement ends up being let me make sure I got this right, 9 foot depth, 9 foot wall, 8 feet below grade, and the continuous insulation is how much? R5. So when I type in R5, you'll notice the U factor drops to 0.086. 0.086. We're cooking along here. We're almost done. I find it very helpful if you'll make this little table like I've done here. Then you just jump into ResCheck and fill it out. You got to get all this information, all these areas and descriptions from the plans. So it takes a little while. That's why I just made up these numbers, Ali. Don't tell anybody. But we'll see how we do. Some of these are worse than code, some of these are on code, and some of these are better than code. So we'll see, particularly now that we're at the ceiling. So we've got a flat ceiling, it's R38. And when I go to the ceiling tab, I'm going to pick a flat ceiling or a vaulted ceiling. They also have an energy truss. I'll do a standard flat ceiling. I'll give it 1 square foot again, just for kicks. And that would be an R38 in the cavity. Okay, it's considered a cavity because there's joists in the way. So that gives me a 0.030. And that is pretty much dead on what the prescriptive code is, 0.03. I also have another ceiling that's vaulted, and so I'm going to add a ceiling, and I'm going to make it cathedral. And this one has an R20 in the cavity, and it's not, none of it's continuous. So that gives me a 0.05. So I'll come down here and type in 0.05. And then finally, the vaulted is R25, and that's the one that's 20 plus the 5 in there. So I'll just go ahead and make another one, just again, so everybody can see it. How's your excitement level right there, Ali? Are you excited?
I'm learning more than I ever have.
Yeah. Well, this would be the 600. Maybe I should have put these numbers in. This would be the 600. This would be the 500, and this would be the 1,000. And in essence, what you'll notice is it's calculating, this area times that U factor, and then that's the contribution for that particular component. This number down here doesn't mean anything. All we're really trying to do is get these U factors. So I made this cathedral ceiling, 600 square feet, and now I'm going to put in the cavity insulation, which is 20. If it was continuous, I'm sorry, I must have had a crazy number there, 20. If it was continuous, then it would be 5, but that's not correct. So I just wanted to show that that gave you a 0.040. That's not what we had. We actually had R25 in the cavity. So we're going to go over here, and you'll notice now that's R25. And we got a slightly worse U factor. It was 040, now it's 041. That's because that foam board is not continuous. So we're going to come over here and type in 0.041. All right, we're in the home stretch. All of the windows, the good news is the U factor is already given. So, you know, if I wanted to, I could just copy these over. But, yeah, whatever. The only, and again, this is what our assemblies actually are. And what we have to do is take this area times this assembly U factor, and then compare it to the same area times this chart. Oops, let me zoom up. This chart right here at the top. So in other words, for a wall that's wood frame, I'm being compared to a 0.084. And you'll notice there may be some slight rounding numbers on there. This R13 is only slightly better, but it's being compared to the 0.084. So I could, if you wanted to, you could put in 084 here. You could try to go through the list, but I think it's actually time to summarize this on the other screen. Okay, so we're going to go back to this tab. Before I do, I'm going to use a little shortcut I like to do, which is take a picture of this. So I'm going to hit New, come down here, take a picture of these values, and then I'll put that over here on the side of my screen. Can you see that, Ollie?
Yep, got it.
Okay, and then I'm going to reduce this down. So now you can really see it. And now I'm going to go back to this. And for this one, I started typing these in. And again, you could copy and paste, but this is just description over here. What really matters, let me make that a little bit, zoom out so I can see that a little bit. All that really matters, I'm on the wrong one, sorry. There, that's what I want to see. This particular one, it's showing me that the compliance calculator, and it's got a description here. And what really matters is what am I actually installing, and then what is the Georgia code, and then ultimately it's doing the math over here in this column. So I'm going to, just for the interest of trying to get this to work right, I've typed in wood frame wall 16, wood frame wall 20, above grade block wall. So I've got those typed in. I'm going to scroll over so I can see, hopefully. What I need to do now is type in the 0.082, and of course you can copy and paste it too. I'm just going to do it by hand. 0.063, and I just described these. I said how much area, what's the cavity, is there continuous, etc. But ultimately, this is the only thing that really matters, is these numbers right here. So 0.089. And why don't we go on and do the same thing down here for the foundation walls. So I've got 3 different kinds of foundations. Let's see, I have them in the right order. Slab on grade, 180 feet. The below grade part is not a factor over there. I'll take that out. And 720 square feet and 500 square feet. So I've got that. And the continuous R values of each of those is in there. The most important thing is to make the math right is just to remember on the slab, and I'll show you what I mean. When you put a slab in, you have to multiply times the perimeter, not times the area. So you have to kind of rework your formula in that cell. But for now, we're just filling in numbers, 0.042 and 1.042 and 0.157 and 0.086. Okay, and we'll go ahead and knock out the ceilings as well. Same animal. Looks like I've typed them in already, but here's where you could type them in: flat area, or copy and paste. It's nice to see this information, but ultimately all that matters is this is 0.03, this is 0.05, and this is 0.041. And then the windows I've actually already put in down here, so they're in the right column, and it's got its area right here. So I just described it as the A windows, and they're all a certain size, and they add up to be 100 square feet. A certain size, and more importantly, a certain performance. So at this point, I'm going to get rid of that because we don't need to see that anymore. And you'll see what's happening down here by the windows. The math is being done. So it's taking the 100 area times the U factor of all A windows, and it's multiplying, it's getting 35. And it turns out that's exactly what code is. So that particular window is right on code. You'll notice this window, these B windows, there's 50 square feet, and they're actually slightly better than code. They're 0.28, and they are being compared against all the windows, or the fenestration is always 3.5. So basically, if you take 50 times 0.28, you get 14, but if you take 50 times just meeting code, you get 17.5. So we're slightly better on those windows. We're break even on these two windows, those windows. And you go on and so forth. So these windows are a little worse because they're 0.44, and they're compared to 7, and they're 8. These windows are a little worse. These windows are just slightly worse, and the door is better. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing up here, but we have to figure out what the Georgia version is for each of these other components over here, for the opaque components. So for wood frame walls, I think I've already got the formula in there. It just multiplies the area, which is over here, times the value in column I. So it's this blue and this blue over here. So what I have to do is go, okay, what is a wood frame wall U factor? And if you go to the prescriptive code, this is a wood frame wall U factor in climate zone 3 is 0.84. So I type in 0.084. And you'll see the contribution of my actual proposed house is slightly better, a little bit of rounding there, but that's okay. And now we're going to do another wood frame walls. Well, it turns out all wood frame walls are the same, 0.084. So no change there, and you can see we're definitely beating code on those walls. Here, we've got a block wall, and that's a mass wall. So we go to the prescriptive code for mass walls, 0.098 is what we're looking at. So I'll flip over to this one, type in 0.098. This is fun, isn't it, Ollie? Yeah, that's your job as comic relief. And for slabs, again, make sure if you look at the formula, what we're doing on the slab is we're not multiplying area, we're multiplying perimeter times the U factor. So that's correct. And then over here, it's going to be the same thing. We just have to tell it what is the slab U factor. And you know what it is? It's the same. So I'm going to hit OK on that and go down here. And it says right there, slabs are 1.042. So we're breaking even on the slab, but we do have to include it. So I'll type in 1.042, and we're good. Crawl space walls, well, let's see what we're compared against. Crawl walls, right here, 0.136. That's the answer. So we're slightly worse on our crawl space wall. It has to do with us being, I think the default is 2 foot below grade, 2 foot above grade, and we're more above grade, so we're slightly worse. Not a whole lot. And then finally, and I've got the right area over there, and finally on the basement walls, we'll go to the prescriptive code table on basement walls, and it says 0.091. That's what we're trying to compare against. So I'll type in 0.091. Okay, now doing the math game over here. And now the next big thing is we got to do the ceiling. So we've got, I put in the 3 types of ceilings that this particular thing has. So it's always going to multiply the area times the U factor and give us that contribution. Here's the area times the U factor, and it happened to be the same contribution. And here's the area times that U factor in that one. So what we got to do is get it for the ceilings. And the interesting thing is ceilings, there's one answer. Everywhere, every climate zone, flat or vaulted, all ceilings are basically the equivalent of 1/38. There are 38, or they're 1/38, which is the 030. So that's where that came from. Okay, so the answer is to type in 0.03 in each one of these. 0.03, 0.03. Oops, I didn't type it in right, did I? 0.03. Okay, so let's see how we did. Let's start at the top and review, working our way down.
Is it 0.03 or 0.30?
It should be 0.03. Basically, we're about 2% worse than code. So let me show you what I was doing. No, it's 030, because if you took your calculator and went 1 divided by 38, it'd be a number pretty close to that. And I think if it was R30, it'd be 033. So it just has to do with the inverse of the R value, more or less. So let's take a look at this. So what happens is each one of these components, all these 3 walls, all those 3 foundations, 3 types of ceilings, and I don't know how many types, 6 types of glass and doors, each of those contributes to the overall heat loss. Those are the total surfaces that make up the house. There's no other surfaces we have not accounted for. And each one contributes, and in some cases it contributes and it's right at code, like in this example. And in some cases it contributes and it's a little worse than code, like this example. And in some cases it's a little better than code. And the idea is that our UA for our proposed home is no higher than the one that exactly meets code. And you can see we are slightly high. Not a whole lot, we're about 2% worse, but it does show up as red. So for this very fancy calculator tool, it at least does tell you red, and we want it to turn green, so and be on the positive side. And then it says, you know, when we're all done, make sure we're okay with that table, the backstop table. So that's another reminder. And there's a couple other things we have to check as well, as like solar heat gain. Whoops, I think that was my error. When we get to this point, what you see is we have not passed. So we're going to need to do a trade-off or something and make something a little bit better. So one thing I thought I'd do is, just for kicks, is let's make this 500 square foot wall right here. It's R13 in the cavity. Let's give it an R3 foam board. Okay, so if I type in R3, you'll notice nothing changed because I need to go update this value. It was 063. I'm going to delete it so I don't get confused. And I made a change, so I'm going to go back to ResCheck. I'm going to take this wall right here. It's this one. And again, I'll just make it 500 square feet so you can see what I'm talking about. So that one, and now it's, oh, sorry, it was R3. My bad. It already was R3. So I think I forgot to type that in. Let's make that an R5. Let's change that to R5 and just see if that makes it slightly better. 056. Let me go, okay, let me make that R5. Great, but the real number is 0.056. And now you can see that reduced my contribution for that component. So let's see how we did overall. Hey, we improved. We're still not there yet, but we did get better. So this is the beauty of doing a UA trade-off. You can play around with things. It takes a little extra time because you got to jump over to ResCheck every time, but you get the idea. So let's say, you know, I don't think I wanted to do that. I'm going to go back to the R3, and I'm going to change that to the 063. I want to try a different trade-off. I want to make something else a little better. And again, here's where you can play with things. Maybe we just say, hey, let's use insulated sheathing everywhere. So let's try that. Let's make the 16-inch walls R3. Again, that is no longer correct, so I'm going to delete that just so I don't get lost. And I'll jump over to the ResCheck, and that is the one that's 1,000 square feet. Probably I should have done that in the beginning. And then the continuous installation is R3, and I'll just change that to R3 since that's what we did. So now you can see that that's an 064. And you'll notice they're slightly different because this is frame 24-inch on center, that's 16-inch on center. And it's a very small effect on the U factor, with foam board, but there's a slightly, you know, benefit for having fewer studs. So 0.64 is the magic number. So I'm going to type in 0.064. And let's see how we did. And voila, we passed. So we got to see us fail. We got to see us try something. It didn't work. We tried a different thing. This time it worked. And ultimately, as long as you have legitimately described all the surfaces that make up your building thermal envelope, all the opaque walls, the foundations, the ceilings, and the glazing and fenestration, all of that compared to the code version of all of that, as long as you're at or less, you pass code. So we got a green, we're good to go. Now we're not out of the woods, okay? We got to check something else. One thing we have to check is to make sure that our solar heat gain is okay. And when you look at the solar heat gain, the prescriptive solar heat gain requirement, I can't remember what it is. So I go over here and it goes, 0.27 solar heat gain. Here it is, 0.27 solar heat gain. And so that's probably, oh, it's there, it's just not showing it. Let me make that bigger. There it is. So the fenestration solar heat gain of 0.27 is a number, but it's a weighted average. So we can have, what we have in this example is we have some windows that are on 0.27, we have some that are worse, and we have some that more that are better. So we have different areas of each of those. So what we're going to do is just simply copy these areas, and I'm not going to worry about the opaque door because it's not part of the solar heat gain weighted average. So I'm going to put those areas in there, and there they are. I've already entered them. I think you have to hand type them in actually. And then for solar heat gain, same thing. There are 27, 30, 24, 24, and 23. And I oops, come over here, 27, 30, 24, 24, 23. And so now it's doing a weighted average, and you can see that the weighted average actually ends up making code. So our windows, some are worse, some are better, we're good to go. So you do have to check the solar heat gain weighted average. As long as it's 2.7 or lower over here, you're green, you're good to go. And also you could do a gut check that seems to tell you, now I entered one window of each of these. You could maybe say, oh, there's 5 of those windows that are A, and each one is 20, and you'll notice the math is the same. You know, or there's 2 of those windows, and each one is 25. Same answer every time. So you can lump them all together because all we're doing is trying to make the math right here check us. So we've got a 0.27 solar heat gain, so we're good to go on that. So we can sort of do it. Yep, we're good on that. And I don't know if you could say fenestration solar heat gain. You could put, you know, 0.27, and the one, of course, the one that meets code is 0.27. So we're good on that. And then you don't actually have to check the U factors because of the other parts of it, because they're being, in essence, compared against all the U factors of everything is being compared against everything else. So that all shows up in this total UA number. There's one more thing we got to check. We got to go up here and see if any of these values are not good enough in terms of our trade-off backstop table. So this is, might even come down here and call it the backstop, you know, so everybody can kind of see that. Oops, that's not how you spell table. And then I'll make that big and bold. So the backstop table is this thing, and we have to just check our inputs against, did we do anything that we can't do? Like, do we have at least R13 in all the wood frame walls? And the answer is yes, we do. Let me scroll over so we can see it. So we have R13 in the cavities. Do we have mass walls? They're above grade mass walls. Do we have at least R5? And the answer is we have R8. So we're good on that. Slab we don't have to worry about. There are 0. Crawl space walls. Do we have a minimum for crawl space walls? It says over here, crawl walls R5 for climate zone 3. So the answer is yes, we're good on that. And if while we're at it, basement walls are R5 as well. So that's that number. So we're good on the crawl and we're good on the basement. even I might be able to say make this R4, and it might pass. In other words, we might still be green down here, but we don't pass unless we also satisfy this table. So that's a really important thing I want to point out. I don't know, you know, you just can't put any values that are worse than these numbers. Does that make sense, Ollie?
Yeah.
All right.
So as much as you play with it, you still need to meet that table.
Yeah, and it doesn't have, you have to check this by hand. You know, in other words, I might be able to get it to show green, but if I make this value R4, and presumably that makes that go up to, I don't know, we have to enter it into ResCheck, but let's just say it makes it go to 0.1. And even though it still passes, which it doesn't, it still doesn't pass. It's got to be good everywhere. So I'm going to change that back to 5. And I think that was 091. And we are, yeah, maybe I'm wrong.
You can unmute twice and it'll put that up.
Yeah, that's true. 086. And so change that back to R5. Thank you. That's why you're here, to help us on this. It takes 2 people to do this. So anyway, if you're good on that chart, and then the ceiling, I think we've talked about that. We are good on these. Let's check the ceiling. The minimum ceiling with an attic is 30. We actually have 38, so we're good on there. The minimum ceiling with spray foam is 20, and we have 20. And the minimum ceiling with fiberglass and foam board is 20 plus 5, and we have that as well. So we're good on the checks. So the 2 checks, in essence, are also, I'll put this down here, checks. I'll just say check SHGC weighted average does not exceed 0.27. So we've checked those 2, and basically this is it. We have shown our legitimate compliance. There's my beep there. And we could print this out and turn this in. It is actually correct, assuming that the areas are all correct, and this is a valid trade-off. It's some work. I fully admit this. It is definitely not as user-friendly as ResCheck. And then of course with ResCheck, what you do is you enter in, like you'd enter in the gross wall area here of, well, maybe 1,200 was there, and that was 560, I think was the answer. And then you'd subtract windows and doors out of these. So you would actually subtract the windows. You know, I got vinyl, double pane, low E windows, et cetera, and you know, I don't know whatever windows, doors those are. You know, I'll put in 20, and you would put in the U factor and so on. So it's designed to do all the hard work for you. Ours is definitely clunkier, but at least we can still use the value of the great built-in tables that ResCheck will produce. So we can pretty much come up with any assembly, and as long as it's in ResCheck, we can compare it to the prescriptive code, which is again right here in Georgia, those values right there. So these are kind of the key issues we're trying to compare against. So Ali, what would we need to say to summarize? I'm going to go back to where we were. You could, to prove this, I would say you probably ought to add a line and put the house address up there or something, you know, or some, you know, house address. We're going to make this the classic 123 fake street. So, and this is somewhere in Georgia. So it's climate zone 3, obviously, we got to tell them that. And you have to make sure you're doing the math correctly. But at the end of the day, if you enter everything properly, all the surfaces are accounted for. You compare what you've got to what is essentially code minimum. And then the only other thing is make sure on the slab on grade that you're actually multiplying by the perimeter times the U factor. Show that again. Not, you know, not over here, not cell D, you want cell E for that one. So once you do that and it comes up green and you pass your 2 checks, then you should be good to go. So that, in essence, is a very crude way of doing what is probably much easier done with ResCheck right there. So, but for Georgia, since we don't have R20 in the walls, again, if you're in climate zone 2, it's not a big deal. You're R13. But everywhere else in the state, you probably want to use the hand UA trade-off, and that's essentially what we're talking about. So with that, I'm going to end up here. I'm Mike.
And I'm Ali.
And this is going to end our webinar on how to use the UA trade-off tool. We'll post this UA trade-off tool that I just worked on the website, so they can download that and play with that.
Yep.
And that's probably the easiest way to do it.